Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Tripawd Talk Radio. This is episode number 116, and we're honored to have the director of the Veterinary Mental Health Initiative with us to talk about grief and loss. We've helped many Tripawds members cope with all sorts of stress and grief over the years, but that's not easy when everyone copes differently. From dealing with a cancer diagnosis or major surgery to end-of-life care, grief affects all pet parents at some time. That's why Dr. Katie Lawlor co-founded the Pet Loss Community, offering grief support to pet parents. You can learn more at petlosscommunitysupport.com. Dr. Lawlor is a clinical psychologist interested in veterinary medicine, especially when it comes to the human-animal bond, grief, and loss. And I'm sure she has some important insight to share on this sensitive subject. So let's get started. Thanks for joining us, Doctor. Welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. And please call me Katie. I'm just so honored and thrilled to be here because this is a topic so deeply close to my heart. And I know it is for you both as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
Hi, Katie. Nice to meet you finally. I first saw you on Instagram and I said, we gotta talk to her. And I am so glad you're here because like Jim said, we deal with grief practically every day in our community. We like to say it's the club nobody wants to join. So before we get into our questions, let's talk a little bit about you. Why did you decide to get into this area?
Of course. Well, I think growing up as the very introverted, awkward middle sister of two outgoing, lovely, socially graced women, I just from a very early age always felt more comfortable in the presence of animals. Growing up, we always had a myriad of animals around. My grandma was kind of the neighborhood rescue lady. So people would drop animals off on her porch at all hours of the time. And I just really grew up helping her. And I think it was when I was in grad school for my doctorate that I realized there wasn't a very large research base, so there wasn't a lot of work being done around this, and really asked my advisors, what I could do to start making a mark in this field. And really the literature, the work just didn't exist. And I feel so fortunate that they were so incredibly supportive. They let me write my dissertation on a related topic, and I just tried to get as much experience as I could volunteering at different animal assisted therapy organizations and things like that, both through the VA and through Stanford Hospital, which is where I was in grad school. So yeah, just this is such an important area that doesn't give the attention that it deserves.
I totally agree. And I think we should clone you because I don't see practitioners like you who are out there doing this. Are there others like you who do this? Is there some kind of association or?
I think right now it's very individual. It's very one-off, especially for those that do pursue a master's, that do pursue a doctorate. There are efforts being made. I think it's a matter of this topic getting the attention, the recognition, and then the funding to do the research that it deserves. I think we're right at the cusp. And I think the more that we normalize it, the more that we validate it, the more that we have these type of conversations, people will be able to share the grief that they're going through. I talk to so many very prominent professionals who say, the loss of my pet hit me harder than human loved ones. Is that normal? Is something wrong with me? I can't go and tell my boss. I can't take time off of this or from work for this. It's the whole range of thoughts and feelings that come with the loss of a pet. And I think, yeah, the more that we bring it to light and create these types of communities, the more we can help each other.
That's so true. And it's, why we do what we do at Tripawds. I still carry Jerry in my heart and there's a huge hole there. And then there's Wyatt and we lost him. And it really affects you, and me. And when you deal with it on a regular basis, it's difficult. And I do want to touch on the Veterinary Mental Health Initiative in a bit, how you're helping practitioners because they're affected so badly. We'll get into that. But
Mhm.
let's talk about the different kinds of grief and
Yeah.
what you're doing to help pet parents.
Yeah, we see so many different types of grief in our community. That's one thing that we've learned through the years is everybody joins us. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people join us because their pet is going to have an amputation.
Mm.
And there's a grief associated with that. We've come to discover that, limb loss is a big deal to somebody who's used to having their pet as their running buddy or their hiking buddy, or just, they've never thought of their pet as being handicapped. And so having to come to terms with that is a form of grief, we've learned. And then because a lot of people join us because of a cancer diagnosis, we've got that anticipatory grief. So I learned that term from a really great book that we talked about long ago called The Legend of Beezer and Boomer. And yeah, have you read it?
No, but I'll have to now.
I'll put a link
Doug
in the show
Koktavi.
notes.
Doug
Yeah.
Koktavi is the author, and we'll put the link in the show notes. And we learned the term anticipatory grief because grief is coming, and we'll.
Yeah, and then of course then there's the actual loss when you have to set your pet free, and there's so much to think about. So I hate to just throw this at you, but that's why we wanted to have you here. So let's talk about the different types of grief and how they differ from one another.
I'm so glad you brought up anticipatory grief, because I actually think anticipatory grief, and I've heard this with the people that I work with, is almost more difficult than when they do pass. But I wanted to share, so there's a clinical definition of grief that really resonates with me, and it's by Mastangelo and Wood. And it says, if we look at grief, it's a reaction to any form of loss that encompasses a range of feelings from deep sadness to anger. And the process of adapting to this loss can vary dramatically from one person to another, depending on their background, their cultural beliefs, their relationship to what was lost, and so many other factors. And I think it's important. I'm going to read a list of symptoms that are very common in grief. First and foremost, to normalize them. But it's really the if and the when and the how we experience them is what makes our grief unique from human to human. So we might experience shock and disbelief. We might feel numb, even denial that this is happening. Maybe, like with that diagnosis, how can this be? I take such great care of my pet. We might feel sadness, despair, loneliness, emptiness, guilt, regret, shame, anger, resentment. Those are what I call the sticky ones, and happy to dive more into those. Those are the really tough ones. And then with those are when we might consider therapy or a higher level of care. We could feel really anxious or insecure or fear of the future, fear of the unknown. And then I also want to point out that we could feel a lot of physical symptoms as well. So fatigue, nausea, sickness, aches, night sweats, heart palpitations, panic attacks, and insomnia. Those are really common in grief as well. And so again, I say that to normalize, to validate, grief looks so different in everyone. And that's due to because we're all unique individuals.
I would certainly say so, because I can't help but think like we've heard somebody we knew once said, oh, well, your dog died, huh? Well, when are you going to go buy another one? And I can't help but think like that person's processing grief differently than us when their pet dies. So
they don't get it.
Yeah. So there's people who get it and people who don't. If we are feeling grief, how do we know what we are feeling is normal? Like if we're in the middle of it.
Is there a normal grief at all?
That's an outstanding question. So I think, and I put normal in my hand air quotes, because I think when I hear the word normal, we might think expected, predictable. Normal kind of equates to healthy, more of that universal human experience. And it is really healthy to grieve. You have to grieve. when we start stuffing things down or distracting ourselves or numbing ourselves out, I like to say that everything that's on the inside is eventually gonna find its way out. And grieving is the healthiest process for that. Now, what that process, whether it's talking to other people, spending time in nature, what the grieving process is going to be unique. But I think you can say that there is a normal grief. There's a really good, I think he's brilliant, but his name's William Warden, and he has 4 tasks of mourning. And I always share these with the people I work with, and the acronym is TEAR. And I'll go through it really briefly, but he says that to really process normal grief, the T is to accept the reality. We have to somehow accept what's happening. Either the pet has received this grave diagnosis, the pet has passed. We've got to accept the reality of the loss. E is for experience it. We can't, again, distract it, numb it out, stuff it away. We have to go through it. The A is for adapting to our new environment, whether that's the loss of the limb or the loss of the pet. Adapting to that environment when that loss is not, when the loss is there or when the pet is not there. And then R is to reinvest in our new reality without them or with that loss. And if we can go through that, that's the healthiest way to process that grief in a normalized way, if you will.
I like the reinvestment framing because it does take effort and time and money and things to, and lots of effort to get there rather than just getting over it.
It's interesting too. The reason I really am glad you asked this question is that in the latest version of the DSM-5, which stands for any mental health clinician will know that stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. They came out with the latest version in March 2022, and there is a diagnosis in there called prolonged grief disorder. I'm happy to give an overview for that, but that's the first time recently that grief has shown up in this manual of mental disorders. And I think it can be helpful if you know, let's say if you were going to a clinician, what they might consider as a concern as compared to what we just discussed, more normal grief. And according to the DSM-5, prolonged grief disorder is present when, after the death of someone close at least a year earlier, and I certainly would count animals among this, the person who's grieving experiences intense yearning or preoccupation, plus at least 3 of the following 8 symptoms I'm going to read. So an identity disruption, not knowing who you are without your pet, disbelief that the loss has happened, avoidance, you don't want to go near your feelings or thoughts, intense emotional pain, difficulties moving on, numbness, a sense that life is meaningless, and loneliness. And those would have to last for at least 1 month. That's when we might start as a clinician to get a bit concerned about your well-being. If you were coming to me and I was seeing that, then we might make a plan for therapy.
Yeah, that kind of leads into my other question is, how do we know when we need therapy? Is there a time frame? Do we go through all of the tier stages that you mentioned? I mean, when is seeking help going to be more beneficial than if we didn't?
That's exactly what I was thinking. And I presume acknowledgement is the first step to identify that you have an issue. And aside from seeking professional help, what tools are out there to help these folks?
No, of course. And I think again, another very outstanding, helpful question. I think it depends on how and where support resonates with you. So I think, for some of us in those first few surreal days and months, either after the diagnosis or after the loss, some of us might find, introverts among us, might find comfort and solace in doing things that we love, being outside, being in nature, or just amongst our real closest loved ones. But for some of us, though, especially if if we really crave that human contact, or we're more extroverted, we find our strength and our peace in others, then that's maybe where I might recommend a support group for that validation, the normalizing aspect, because everyone will have that shared experience. Now, I think if you're finding yourself really stuck in your grief, perhaps you aren't able to move on after that year-long period, or you're not functioning, you're not able to take care of yourself personally and professionally, you're not able to go to work. Or even, let's say the loss was traumatic, or it was sudden and unexpected. Maybe you're feeling guilty because you didn't recognize the symptoms. And I have a whole other thing to say about that. Animals are so stoic, and with all the vets that I've worked with, it can be so difficult to recognize these things. Or perhaps you're feeling a guilt because you couldn't afford a higher level of care. Maybe they needed all these medications and surgeries. Or maybe there's ambiguity around that they went missing, or you weren't there when they passed, and so you don't know fully what happened. That's when I think therapy can really be helpful, because in therapy, you hone in on the aspects of your grief that are causing you the most suffering. Whether it's unhelpful thinking patterns, the term for that is cognitive distortions, or intrusive thoughts or images, maybe some trauma there, panic attacks. That's when a therapist would use evidence-based treatments and gold standard coping skills to really help you in the process. So I hope that might be helpful, just kind of differencing out when support versus seeing a licensed clinician.
That does
would
help.
Be
Definitely. Let's oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, let's talk about the support side of things, because we've run a support community for years. And when it comes to grief, I would assume support and a community of support is one of the most important tools. Aside from getting therapy to address your specific concerns, everyone could benefit from getting support from others. So I know you have a community based on that. Let's talk about that for a bit.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think that with these support groups, you're showing up. Loss is so vulnerable, right? And I think sometimes our closest loved ones may not fully understand the impact that this diagnosis or the amputation or the loss is having on us. And I think this is a tough one to hear, because if we reach out to those friends, those loved ones who don't get it. I have a very close friend, and she's not an animal person, and if I went to her, she wouldn't understand, and she wouldn't be able to give me what I need in that moment. And so I think part of reaching out to a support group, going to a support group, is understanding the help that you're seeking, that you're searching for, and people that can meet those expectations. If we go and we're around people that don't get it, or like you said, there was someone that said, when are you going to get a new dog? Then we're really setting ourselves up to be hurt even worse. So I think the best support groups are, you're surrounding yourself with love and understanding, validation by people who've been there, and that can really give you what you need.
It sounds like in a support group, a community, of like-minded folks, you're getting empathy from people who understand. What I see so many times is people turning to social media and they get this superficial sympathy.
Yes.
So
Emojis.
Yeah, hugs, kisses, you'll be fine.
Yeah, can you tell us, is there a difference clinically, psychologically? What is the difference between just going to Facebook and bearing your soul, hoping that people will get it, versus getting support either one-on-one or with
somewhere without the distractions, with people who understand? Like,
oh gosh. Well, there's been, social media. I was thinking about this last night, because Facebook came during my senior year of college. And so I feel like I've had, those 20 plus years now with Facebook. And I think you really named the word that I would use too. Superficial. There's been a lot of studies done that social media actually in the long term can be quite can make us quite depressed. People often show only one side to themselves on social media, but when it comes to grief, it's kind. Certainly people can post kind things, but do you know that person? Are you forming a real connection with them? I would also question, what are their motives? If it's someone you don't know, in reaching out or making this larger display, sometimes that can feel really empty. I would imagine. I think certainly when I'm grieving, I want those more quiet moments. I want a real connection with someone that seems to understand, even if it's just listening. They really don't have to say anything at all. But that I just know that I can open up to and feel really safe. I think sometimes social media does not feel safe.
I'm guessing it could actually be harmful and detrimental to the person if they're putting out like a real heartfelt plea for help in what, someone just sees in the doom scrolling as another post and gives them the superficial, oh yeah, you'll be fine, he's by your side. Whereas you turn to a community of support and you get the help from people who understand.
No, I think that's exactly it. If you share, the depths of your devastation, my animals are my soul. If I'm going on it and bearing my soul and it doesn't get met with the support that I'm clearly looking for in that moment, that's just got to feel, I would think that would exacerbate any kind of loneliness, emptiness, isolation that you're feeling. I think social media is wonderful for so many things, but a real grief connection, that would be difficult.
So social media has its pluses. It's how we met you. But there are times when you want that comfort of knowing that your feelings and everything aren't exposed to the world. So there's a pet loss community that you've been involved with. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Of course. So how the pet loss community came to be, I think it actually was a product of the pandemic. And certainly there's no silver linings to a pandemic where so many people passed away. But before, I didn't even know what Zoom was at the start of the pandemic. Now we live our lives on it, right? But I had facilitated the support group for the Sacramento SPCA. They are wonderful. This was before COVID, and it was in person, and it was once a month, and we had such a response, and it was just such a beautiful community, since that seems to be our theme word today. It was such a wonderful community that was so supportive, and we had new members every month, but then we also had people that had been coming for more than a year, just because of the camaraderie and the trust that we were able. And obviously when the pandemic happened, we weren't able to do that anymore. And there was such a need. Loss is just so isolating, right? It's so lonely. That's what we want to isolate. We don't know how we're going to be able to go on with our lives. And so this was a platform that let people come together. And I think it was done in a very well-intentioned way that kept the group very small, kept it at a cap of 10, so that those who wanted to speak could share. There was quality time. There was ways to build those connections. And then in addition to the groups, there is a private, to speak to your point exactly, a private Facebook page that people could share on. But it's really when you have those conversations, those very human dialogues, that I think that's what brings healing. Certainly not the small, the one-offs or the emojis or the hope you feel better soon.
No, I think that's great because at Tripawds, we have a specific discussion forum for coping with loss. But what happens is I think a lot of people don't feel like they're part of our community once their dog or their cat passes away. And we know they're grieving and we always leave the door open. We have a helpline, we have everything, but a lot of people don't come back. And it's good to know that this community is out there because now we can direct them to it so that they can get, the kind of support that they need at that point in their journey. Now, when it comes to pet loss versus human loss, how are they different? How are they treated differently? Because I know, like you referenced a human definition of grief earlier, but are they treated differently? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, I think so. I think it's just the way our society, especially in the United States, deals with loss. I think that, when we lose a human loved one, there is such an outpouring of concern and of help. We have human rituals, usually there's a memorial service or a funeral or, some sort of religious or spiritually based processes that we go through that are, tied to mourning, that are tied to bereavement. There's bereavement leave for humans. There's not bereavement leave for animals, even though so many of us would benefit from that, and I think that we feel, I'll be really honest. I'll offer an example. I had a rabbit, his name was Jem, and he passed away very unexpectedly in August of 2020. And I remember there was no way that I could have come into work that week and served, even though, I've had so much training and experience. I could not be there for the women that I worked with. But I was too nervous to there was a barrier to me telling my boss that my rabbit had passed away and I was going to need the week off. I just don't think it has reached a level where it's recognized as a true, devastating, profound loss, at least not in this country. And then just in society in large, exactly to what you were speaking to, the U.S. is very, it's very focused on the good and the happy and the best. And I think that ties into exactly what we were talking about with social media as well. That's what we're not comfortable with grief in this country, let alone the grief involved with losing a pet.
It sounds like a takeaway here is that, when we experience grief, we need to recognize it in ourselves first, because society doesn't necessarily view it as important. I went through a period where I was so into fish and I lost a few fish at once. It was a big tank and the major event happened. I lost a bunch of fish and people think, oh, yeah, they're fish. But they were big, beautiful fish that I came home to every night. And I really dealt with grief there and had trouble getting through it because no one understood.
Absolutely. And I cannot tell you that, just especially being based in Palo Alto, the hub, Silicon Valley, and some of the clients I worked with were very recognizable names, and they were saying, with these massive companies, and they're saying, I'm devastated. I lost my parakeet. This is my best friend. This is who I came home to every day. With humans, even our closest loved ones, with our partners, with our siblings, our very best friends, those relationships are very complex and dynamic. With our animals, it's unconditional love, it's stability. They have been with us through the highs and the lows, the job losses, the divorces. We really come to rely on that unconditional love. And again, even in the best human relationships, there's highs and lows and different personality types. It's a different dynamic than what we experience with our animals.
Completely. I can't tell you how many people have said I grieved more for my dog or my cat than I did for a parent. And we hear that all the time. And I'm hoping that, that pet loss will start to become normalized and accepted, and just for people to be able to support other people as they're going through it. One of the questions I had for you is, how can we support people as they're going through the loss of their pet, either, if they're grieving the amputation aspect of it, or afterwards when they set their dog or their cat or their rabbit free? I mean, how can we be there for them
without sounding superficial?
Yeah.
Are there ways that certain things like we shouldn't say?
Yeah.
We had a grief counselor tell us for our helpline hosts certain things that, oh, you'll be fine. It's like, no, you may not. So are there certain standards of caring for others once you recognize grief in them?
Absolutely. I think, to speak first to that, I think there are a few things that you can say. And I do want to caveat, I think some of us are so afraid of saying the wrong thing. We don't want to make it worse. But I think if you really think about what your loved one is going through and wanting to be there for them, I really don't think you can go wrong. But if people do want examples, here are some. So things you can say are, my favorite thing about your animal was, or this must be so deeply hard for you. You are a great dog dad, you are a great cat mom. I'm here for you. Do you want to talk about it? Things not to say. When are you going to get another pet? It was just a dog, it was a cat, it wasn't a human. You know, this is one that surprises people, but did you try this? Did you try that? I get it, but it's not helpful, because it's going to make the pet parent, question their own actions, or ruminate on it in their head. It's time to move on. Let's talk about something happier.
Oh gosh.
I know, and you'd be surprised. I think too, if you are afraid of saying the wrong thing, or you don't know what to say, I mean, little acts of kindness goes such a long way. Leave a meal outside on their porch, leave a potted plant, a gift card, anything. And I'm a huge fan, again, in the context of me being a huge introvert, of sending a text that says, no need to text me back, because texting is so transactional. A text goes unanswered and you feel all this pressure to write back. But something you could do is, no need to text me back, just want to let you know I'm thinking about you and I'm here if I can be helpful in any way. It's as simple as that. Or write a card and slide it under their door.
I love those tips. Those are awesome. I'm a writer and I struggle for things to say because I always feel like I'm not saying the right thing, or does it sound contrived, or so I appreciate that the actions speak louder than words. So
and the greatest action, I think, on that exact note, the greatest action we can give to someone that's grieving is just to be there and not say anything at all. Just to let them share, if they want to, about the memories, about their pet. And so many people think that those memories are going to fade. They're not. You're going to have, people get so scared. I'm going to forget this, I'm going to forget that. I can promise you're not. And it can be helpful to write them down, or to make a little video diary on your phone. No one ever has to see it if you are concerned about those memories going away, but they won't. They won't.
That is great to hear, because we hear that a lot, that people are scared that their memories of their animal are gonna fade. We started Tripawds blogs as one way to help people process the whole journey from amputation, throughout the rest of their pet's life. And they tend to be really helpful. A lot of people use them to just let their emotions out after.
And we have members who will come back, year, 2
Yeah.
years later on the anniversary of their dog's passing to write eloquently about, how they're coping with it and how they dealt with it. And that just helps other people. And it comes back to the community aspect of support. It seems like, A, you need to acknowledge the grief in yourself, and B, seek for it where you'll get genuine support from others who get it.
That's it. Exactly.
And I have a question that I hadn't sent to you, but I probably should have, because I'm wondering say you see this other animal and you're thinking, I need that in my life again. A lot of people will go out and do it like within a week. And some people, we waited 2 years in between each dog. And how do we know when it's the right thing to do as we're processing grief for an animal?
I think this is a brilliant question, and this is the question I get asked the most, second only to guilt. There seems to be so much guilt when it comes to loss of our animals, and I think a large part of that is because we can't talk to them. We haven't figured out a way how to talk to them and ask, their final wishes or reassure them, and that's on us. And I'd love to discuss that too, because I think we're science is right on the cusp of fully recognizing how sentient and brilliant animals are. So with regards to knowing when is the right time, this is absolutely unique to every individual. I think as animal lovers, we have so much love to give, and our animals are a huge part of our core identity and our value in life. And some people, you're right, they go the next day to the shelter and they bring home a new love, and some people wait years. And I think as long as you're not doing it as a band-aid, this is not going to erase or get rid of the pain of the previous loss. Certainly it can help, but it's not going to. I think a lot of people do it to just distract from the pain, and that you have to process that at some point. And I think you have to also realize that this is an entirely different creature. This is not going to replace Timmy or Fluffy by any means. This animal is going to have its unique personality, its quirks, its mannerisms. And I have heard, occasionally that when someone adopts too soon, they're almost angry at the new pet because it hasn't replaced the pet. They wanted it to be that replacement, or they don't understand why they're still sad about the loss of the previous pet. And I think cognitively we know that this is, again, a unique animal, but the feeling wise in our heart and our soul, our body, it won't have dealt with the loss yet. So that's my caveat to bringing in a new love, to just make sure you really have processed the pain from the previous pet's loss.
And you mentioned two things there that really struck home with me, guilt and replacement. Because I was not ready for another dog, and I probably still wouldn't be ready for another dog after losing Jerry until Wyatt came into our life through our community and Renee was on board and ready. And I did have guilt about loving Wyatt. And there was, the resentment because he wasn't Jerry, until I realized he's not a replacement. He's just a different dog. He's a new dog in our life. And then I was able to develop an incredible bond with him.
Yeah. If there's anything there, you can see how people reacted to grief differently when you're part of a team here, because I was ready long before he was. And we had to reach the decision together to know that it was the right time. And it took almost 2 years last time and 2 years the first time. So you'd mentioned guilt, and let's touch on that guilt, because I know that a lot of people, myself included, felt terrible for not catching my dog's limp, and I saw it too late. There are people in our community who are part of the veterinary community. I tend to see that they take it even harder. And I think it's when you know too much, the reality of a situation like this hits you even harder. Can we talk a little bit about that?
This is a great segue into the Veterinary Mental Health Initiative that I'd love for you to address, because there were some shocking facts that I discovered about the numbers when it comes to suicide in the veterinary community. So please, let's go there.
Sure. I think the main component with guilt is this feeling or these thoughts that we should have been able to recognize the symptoms, or we should have been able to stop the diagnosis from happening or stop the death from happening. And so what happens is when we look at the event through that kind of tainted, distorted viewpoint, oh, I should have been able to do something more, we get really stuck, because that's not the reality of the situation. And so how we get out of that is we have to go back to that time. And most of us don't want to do that because it's so painful. We don't want to go back to those last final months, or we don't want to go back to the final day. But we need to have a realistic recollection of what actually happened. You probably were paying very close attention. You probably did your absolute best. You probably spent as much as you could on treatment. But we really, as humans, I think, berate ourselves and just really are cruel to the point where we just kind of decimate ourselves. Because in a really twisted way, it's easier to be mad at ourselves than it is to deal with the grief that they're no longer here or they have the diagnosis. But that's where the guilt comes from, this kind of distorted viewpoint that I should have been able to be superhuman, or I should be able to recognize this. And I think for vets and vet techs, yes, it's even worse because this is their clinical training. This is what they've devoted their lives to. They know all the science. They know too much. They know everything. We could try this. We could do this. We could try, this treatment. But at the end of the day, we're all just humans doing our absolute very best. But I do think that's where guilt comes from, that a lot of times it's just easier to be so much mad at ourselves than it is to deal with the loss and adjusting to that.
And these clinicians and sports staff are dealing with it up to dozens of times each day, different cases. And then they have long-term cases and they have to turn around and go into the next room with more bad news or, a smile on their face. So what is the VMHI doing aside from raising awareness? And this is a part of the Shanti Project, I believe.
Yes, absolutely. So, you really have a fantastic understanding. So, people veterinarians, veterinary technicians, everyone in the vet med community, they go into this profession because they love animals. They love caring for animals. They love, and in that way, they care for us, right? The pet parents. But a lot of times they're on the front lines of abuse and neglect. Veterinary medicine is very different from human medicine. There is a cost aspect up front. When I was working, I did 2 years of training on an inpatient unit. We would never turn away anyone because of their inability to pay. That is not the case in several vet practices. They can't. It costs money to do these procedures, and these medications cost money. They've really devoted their entire lives to being able to help animals, and there's so many barriers to that are really outside of their control. And I think that can lend itself to, we do see higher rates of anxiety, of depression, of suicidal ideation in the vet med community compared to the general population. And I really think it stems from them wanting to be of help. And there are limitations to that because this is a human society. So yes, how the VMHI actually came to be was in the fall of 2020. A very good friend of mine who is also a veterinarian reached out. I was still in private practice at the time at a women's clinic in Palo Alto. And she said, I have a client who, unfortunately, her dog was just killed in a hit and run accident. She's having a very difficult time. Could you see her for therapy? And I said, gosh, Kathy, this vet's name is Kathy. I said, I would be honored to, but because, of the dual relationship in human medicine, I'm friends with you, she's your client. That's a dual relationship. Ethically, that would not be a good fit. But let's jump on a Zoom, follow the pandemic, and we'll get her connected to care. Let's do that. And so it was in that coffee Zoom date that Kathy, this very experienced veterinarian, decades of experience, highly regarded in the vet med community, really started saying, I tried my hardest. I feel like I failed you. I'm doing everything that I can. And the client was very understanding. And she said, gosh, Kathy, I know you've been my vet for 30 years. Of course I know this. And it was then that the client, who is a well-known philanthropist in San Francisco, who's able to make things happen very quickly, said, gosh, we have to do something about this. There has to be a supportive place for vets. And so we started with a pilot program in the spring of last year. And what we offer are support groups for vets. And we also now have them for everyone in the vet med community. They're 6 consecutive weeks for an hour, and they're on Zoom. They're open for the first 2 weeks, but then closed for the reasons we discussed, to really build that trust and camaraderie. They're not recorded, again, because with the social media and the technology, it's harder to create that safe space. And then we also offer individual sessions, or private sessions for vets. And that's for a variety of reasons. Oftentimes we get the vet med community is really small. I didn't realize there's only about 120,000 vets in this country. When you think of all the animals and all the people, that's not very much. And so we get some very prominent vets where their presence might be difficult for others to share and fully disclose. Maybe they sit on a board or a foundation. And then oftentimes it's the first foray into any kind of mental health services. We hear a lot that vets are supposed to be able to do their job. And just like you said, in exam room 1, they have a new puppy and the family is just bubbling over with joy. And then in exam room 2, they're doing a humane euthanasia for a cat they've known and treated for 20 years. And then in exam room 3, they have to give very grave prognostic results. And then maybe in exam room 4, they have a pet who's showing up with the symptoms that their own pet passed away with. And they have maybe 30 seconds in the hallway to regroup. I think it's just bringing public awareness of the very complex aspects of the vet med community.
It sounds like the initiative is helping clinicians and practitioners open a door for them to understand they're not alone. And that brings us back to the value of community and support. And we've covered quite a bit here. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to just wrap this up by asking, where can people learn most about the community support for pet parents and this health initiative, mental health initiative for vets and techs?
Absolutely. Anyone can email me. My email is K, as in Katie, and then my last name, Lawlor, LAWLOR @shanti.org. The Veterinary Mental Health Initiative is a program of Shanti, which is a beloved Bay Area institution for almost 50 years. So they can reach me there. And then for purposes of connecting, because I do think that's what social media is great for, at Pet Loss Psychologist or at Veterinary Mental Health is the VMHI's webpage. And then I know the Pet Loss community, you were kind enough to share the website earlier. They have their own Instagram page as well, at Pet Loss Community.
And we'll put all these links in the show notes, and just can't thank you enough for sharing all these valuable tips.
No, it's just, it just means so much to me because I can tell we're such kindred spirits. And I do think the service that you provide is invaluable because animal lovers, animal people really do resonate with each other. We feel seen, we feel heard. This has certainly been such an inspirational, probably the best thing in my opinion that I'm going to do all day. And it's just, your work is just so important for all the things that we talked about: community, trust, camaraderie, showing up for each other. You're absolutely never alone.
And your passion shines through in everything you say and do. So we can't thank you enough.
Yeah,
Ditto.
The world needs you. I am so glad you're out there. Thank you.
Oh gosh, that feeling is highly mutual.
Three paws up to Dr. Lawlor for the good work she's doing to help pet parents cope with grief. Learn more about the Veterinary Mental Health Initiative at shanti.org/VMHI, and get all the support you need throughout your entire tripod journey at tripawds.com.
He's a three-legged dog and he's still pretty good.